drainage, and they have to rip up some of the concrete to get to them. So there's been some savings in Flanders, kind of about the same in Nyack Center, and then there's some additional costs, which comes with additional delay. So Lily B will be a few weeks behind compared to the other schools in the first phase. But it doesn't mean they're going to miss their deadline. So that's what's going on there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great report. Mrs. Hardy.
Zoning Commission will meet tomorrow night, and other than that, I do not have a report.
Have fun with that. Mr. Siri, I guess.
Okay, for Parks and Rec, the commission that elects people to the East Lyme Sports Hall of Fame met, and there'll be 9 inductees coming up in December. Of note, Bob Tobin, who founded Little League and so forth in town, was on Parks and Rec for years. Millen Kessler, posthumously, but well-deserved, and Julie Putnam, our director of Parks and Rec's wife, Hans Wiederman, I think I got that name right, you would remember. Ryan Cochran, he'll be the first soccer player to go in. He graduated early 90s. Todd Donovan had a very good career in baseball and football. And Bob Kelly, who coached in town for a lot of years, raised a family in town. Bob was a major league pitcher back in the 30s and 40s for the Chicago Cubs and Cleveland Indians. So,
Wow.
and there's a couple other people I'm missing. I'm sorry to those, but that'll be coming up.
It's a big group.
It is a big. There's 2 more people. I can't think of who they were. And did you want to cover water and sewer?
Was I mentioned tonight?
There was such
athletic accomplishments?
overwhelming support for you. They figure they're going to hold a
gonna
special
wait.
one. They're going to wait.
Yeah.
So.
Well, hope they don't wait too long. Okay. You wanted to mention water and sewer? Go ahead.
I was just going to mention, last week, water and sewer, we had to address a decision by the appellate court, which said basically, we did not do due diligence in giving sewer capacity when Landmark requested it, Mr. Russo from Landmark. So we've adopted a interim policy or procedure to whereby if any person comes in and they're going to need more than 5,000 gallons of sewer capacity per day, or if it's a development which there's more than 20 units. So either or, they'll have to apply, come in and see Brad, and then Brad will bring his calculation as to how much they'd qualify for based on how many or how much they would need to the commission, and the commission would vote for it. Till now, Brad has been the one administratively handing out that. The court did not like that, so this way the force of the commission is behind that. So, but the case is on appeal to the state Supreme Court, so we'll see what happens then.
Thank you. Mr. Cunningham.
Well, let's see, historic properties, they didn't meet last night, but they had the barbecue bike race, and I think it was well attended. They had a nice day for it. I think there were quite a few riders that attended, and I think it was a moneymaker for them, so I was happy to see that. In September, I attended the Wellsco meeting, and they are still discussing amending their aquaculture policy statement, which will affect the ability for aquaculture operations, experimental and otherwise, in the river. And they also discuss the application by Nyack Bay Shellfish Farm to pursue an operation in the river. So that was vigorously discussed at the meeting, and that's my report from Moscow.
Before I move on, there's a lot of chatter on social media about this. I mean, I just want to point out and thank the members of Wellsco. There's 4 members from East Lyme and 4 from Waterford, Waterford East Lyme Shellfish Commission. And they're doing their level best to be fair, to be to have all the facts, and to make an intelligent decision on behalf of both towns, but in our case, on behalf of our town, we have given them the authority to make these decisions, like we give our zoning commission authority to make zoning decisions. So they know the responsibility that they have, and they're 4 great citizens. They're volunteering, and they're doing their best. And I just want to thank them publicly and on the record of all the time and energy and work that they're doing to protect our Niantic River, but also move it forward. So, and thank you, Mr. Cunningham, for going to the many long meetings.
It's interesting stuff. I'm
Wellsco
learning.
can kind of be a sleepy little commission sometimes,
Well,
but
not
but
recently.
Not since you've been around.
No.
Okay, Mr. Daigle,
From the Harbor Management and Shellfish Commission,
another one.
similar, on the same subject of aquaculture, they've appointed 2 members to a subcommittee to work with Wellsco and the town of Waterford on their policy revision. And from the Inland Wetlands Agency, they did approve the 23-lot subdivision on Twin Valley Lakes Road, which is, Mr. Solano said, is pending before the Planning Commission at this time.
Terrific. Thank you. I have just a few items. I made mention at the meeting tonight that the Costco's application building permits have come in, as well as their fees. They backed up a truck and unloaded hundreds of pounds of blueprints and drawings and everything that we required of them. And our engineers and our small staff downstairs have been pouring through them to get this program going. We all know about Route 156 being paved, being milled currently. There's a lot of frustration from the town side. The state's doing their best, I guess, but there's a lot of people popping tires. Be careful out there on 156. The race structures are in the middle of the road, and on a rainy night, you might not see them. And before they put the orange paint on them, I think even in the bright sunshine, you may not have seen some of these. And I know people are damaging their cars. I can't do anything about that, and our town can't go out there and fix the situation. It's a state road. We have communicated to the state to please remark the raised structures. That's the only thing we can do. They have a schedule that they're keeping. They should start paving the week of October 8th, which would be, Columbus Day. It would be next week that they should start the paving. But that's a 3-week process, going from the bridge to Rocky Neck and then doing it twice. They'll do a one coat, they'll go back and do it again. And then each curb cut it requires micro management. It requires them to, work the drainage and the approach into each driveway, each road, each curb cut. So it's a long process. So appreciate everyone's patience, but also understanding that the town has got its hands tied. In the meantime, the town's project of paving down at Saunders Point is moving along, but we too have run into issues. We had a lot of bad weather in the last couple of weeks, significant bad weather.
Several inches of rain.
Bad timing. We got to wait until the end of the season before we do these projects. And lately, our autumn storms have been significant. These weren't even named storms. This is just big time water, inches and inches of rain. So we had some washout down there, but we're getting to that as well. And even more so, a delicate surgical situation when we're talking about drainage in that small beach community and making sure every curb cut is done right. A few other items, and near and dear to my heart, and the Niantic Bay Oyster Fest is this coming weekend. It's going to be Saturday behind St. John's. I guess they call that Rogers Field, I believe. And they'll be parking on St. John's Green. And St. John's has graciously given us their rear field to have the Niantic Bay Oyster Fest. We envision this as developing into a Taste of Mystic, or Mystic, they call it Mystic Eats now. But having local restaurants coming out, local food trucks. There's a beer tent off to the side that's fully. We have the liability. We have the certified servers and all that. There's a significant donation by Guinness to put that on, and of course there's oyster activity, oyster shucking and oyster eating and all that stuff, as well as kid things, and all the money raised will go to the Miracle League fields, which is growing in its balance of meeting their goal. I wanted the board to know that we had a wedding at the Brookside Farm and Museum. And this came about rather suddenly. There was a wedding being set up at a facility that we have a cease and desist order on, and we said no more weddings at this house. And it's turned into an event center. It's not allowed in our zoning. So when we got word that a tent was being put up, we immediately went out there and shut them down. And this was maybe on a Thursday, the wedding to be on Saturday. And of course, we're ruining someone's wedding when we do that, but we're also enforcing a cease and desist and protecting a neighborhood. And believe me, the owners have gotten proper notice, but they choose to ignore it. We offered the Brookside Farm or called them and said, would you be? It's a small wedding. It was under 100 people, and met all our goals and qualifications. And they had their wedding without any complaint that I've been aware of, and the fire marshal stayed for the whole event, and it went off without a hitch. So, unfortunately, the Brookside Farm Board of Directors haven't updated their fee schedule yet. So what could have been a several $1,000 money-making event, and I think that could have been possible. They raised some money, but I think they'll be able to see improvements with that process in the future. But it went off without a hitch. We had the police, run through a few times. But all the folks were staying at the Mohegan Sun. They were bussed in, so there was no concern about driving and all that. Very few cars. And I wanted you to know that what we did a couple months ago here saw some good results. And I know there's a baseball game on tonight that I don't care about, but I know there's some people on our commission that are anxious to get home and watch the one-game playoff. So that's my report this evening. Please go out to the Niantic Bay Oyster Fest this weekend. It's on Saturday from noon to 8 p.m. There's music, there's food, and all the money goes to a good cause. This should be a lot of fun, and we'll see more of this hopefully in the future. Public comment. Sure, Mrs. Santoro.
I will be brief. Ann Santoro here, 11 Rose Lane, East Lyme. I'm on Board of Finance and served with Mark and Dan Cunningham, Mark Salerno, to create and help create the purchasing policy. I just wanted to correct the record. Actually had a little presentation ready for this evening, but I can just pass out my little summary to you for your folders. But I wanted to just point out, and I know that Dan has done this in the past, that the Connecticut statute at issue, which governs the $25,000 threshold, concerns ordinances. And I think Dan has made this clear, as the rest of us have, that if the policy comes to pass, you're passing a policy, not an ordinance. There are ways around that within that statute. One could, a municipality could change their charter, have a special act, and get around it. But for the time being, that is that threshold. So I I just wanted to make that clear, because in your, your earlier discussion, it seemed as though the subcommittee was, making a point that the statute per se says that there is a $25,000 limit, a threshold from which one must have, a full bidding process operating. So basically, I just wanted to correct the record for that, and that also I'm available at any time if
I might call on you on that.
Right,
Thank you.
right. And I will pass out this, it was just a little highlight sheet of the proposed purchasing policy.
Thank you.
I think there's two there.
Thank you, Ann.
Your discussion has already passed on this, but this is just something for your file, and as, you know, I have no problem with our town attorney taking a look at the policy. That's perfectly fine, and I'm available for any conversation if need be. But this, I think, just sets up, you know, the basic, you know, concerns. Why should you adopt a written policy? How we created it, a little background information, and the essential features. I felt as though in our meeting of your last Board of Selectmen meeting, getting in a little bit on the weeds on some terminology, some phrasing, and I just wanted us to take a little bird's eye view, if we could, on the good points of the policy, and not to forget those as we go forward. So, thanks.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Londrigan.
Tim Londrigan, 90 Bay Shellfish Farm, 59 Woodlawn Road, New London, Connecticut. I'm not sure if it's a good thing if the first selectman knows my name by heart, or if it's a bad thing. Anyways, I thank this commission for meeting tonight and hearing me. I primarily came because of the East Lyme Harbor Management Commission on the agenda. I wouldn't say I've gone over the amendments or changes with a fine-tooth comb, but a medium tooth. And they're all agreeable to me, specifically regarding aquaculture and the growth of shellfish within the waters. It's very specific, very good. It promotes it just as the state and the federal government is currently. The second reason I came before this commission is I did send out a letter to the first selectman regarding the Cheney dock, the Cheney Park docks. I hope everyone had an opportunity to review those comments I made. I know it's a kind of a sticky issue, but I really, best interest of the town is at my heart. Growing business, growing waterfront development, and just keeping New England in Niantic. The third reason, I apologize for my appearance. I started work at 5 this morning. Went to a meeting with Julie Wilson for the Niantic Bay Oyster Fest, which I'm not running. A lot of people get confused with that because my name is Niantic Bay Shellfish Farm. I will be there. I think it's a great opportunity, and honestly, it's going to benefit a great, nonprofit. But in the future, I really hope it's repetitive, really big. Just so you know, the Milford Oyster Festival, which brings in about 40,000 people, is not happening next year. And I really think it's not happening. The East Coast Shellfish Growers Association runs that. They're not doing it next year. And this town could capitalize on that, bring that volume of people in, and it just could be absolutely incredible and huge. So I'm staying on with that committee next year, and hopefully it turns into something. So as always, I'll be here after the meeting if any of the board has specific questions for me regarding my business, my plans, anything. I'm open to it. Anyways, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to, if I could, it's not so much a selectman's response. Well, it's a response to something that was said that we don't have, somehow it dropped off the communications on our agenda, and we do have communications in your folder, and you can review them at your leisure. One is a letter that also has some support documents from our from our finance director to correct some of the calculations that were included in the letter from a town employee. And if the letter from Mr. Lonergan isn't in your communication now, it will be, because we're not currently looking at the dock leases that are coming up due at the end of December, but we need to be moving on that, and I have the town attorneys working on that. We have several interested parties, for your knowledge, and I count at least 6 people who would like to get possession of the 2 docks that might be available. So we're gonna have to create some kind of a lottery system. We did suggest a sealed bid, but I'm not sure if that will be fair or not. We'd have to look at that, but one way or the other, this commission will be talking about that at our next meeting, about the upcoming renewals of the docks, and who would qualify, what the cost would be, and whether we go into a lottery or a sealed bid process. Any other comments from any other selectmen?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, well, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for coming by.